Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining the CVAC Overview Town Hall. We'll get started in about a minute. Okay, I think we can get started now. So thank you again, everybody, for joining. Before we get into the content of our presentation, I wanted to take some time to introduce everybody who's on the call today. So we have our Fiscal Sprint Team subject matter experts who will be available to answer your questions throughout today's town hall. We have Lan Duong, Carmen Fernandez, Nancy Tedlos, Jeff Brandyberry, Jaron Matthias, and Ishan Katoch. We also have a DOF analyst, Esther Barbieri, on the line. And then we have our Fiscal Change Management team for SEO and STO releases. We have me, Brianna Lee. I'll be giving the presentation today, and then Corey Cortez will be helping to moderate the questions that come in. And then we also have our digital media subject matter expert, James, who always helps our town halls to run smoothly. And then today we'll be using Menti for engagement questions. And because usually we've had our town halls through WebEx and now we're using the Teams event, we wanted to let you guys know that we'll be doing Q&A in the Teams event. So to ask questions, you can go to there should be a live event Q&A sidebar in your Teams, and you can just type a question in the text box. So throughout the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to type it in there, and then we'll answer them there. And then now we'll go over to Menti. So as usual, you can go on your phone, you can use your computer, go to www.menti.com, and then enter in the code 8459-104. So we'll answer our first icebreaker question. So the first question is, what is one word to describe your Thanksgiving? And my word, I think I would say, would be joyful. We'll give about a minute for people to get into the Menti and answer the question. Hopefully everybody had time during this break to relax, as it looks like, and also just enjoy your time off. I'm sure the Thanksgiving looked different this year, but hopefully it was still, you're still able to have a good time. Okay, so now we'll go back to the presentation. I'll leave this up, so if you're still getting on, you can answer it. And then reminder again, if you have any questions, use the Teams event chat bar to submit your questions. Okay, so getting into the actual presentation, as an introduction, today we're going to be covering the CVAC functionality in 3 parts. We're first going to go over a functionality overview. Then we're going to go over events where the CVAC budget check occurs. And then lastly, we will go through the available CVAC exception dashboard that's available for exception handling. So to start, CVAC functionality is coming to your department. What this functionality does is that when transacting in Fiscal, it will automatically validate that there's enough fund cash and appropriation authority to complete a transaction. So the validation that you should be used to that happens today in SCO Legacy is going to happen upfront in Fiscal. And then for a high-level overview of the CVAC control functionality, if you would like to watch it, we created a video on our YouTube channel. So if you look at your presentation, there should be a link to click on to watch this video. And then if your BU has a shared fund, those funds will be set to track with and not control. So what track with is Fiscal tracks that there's enough fund cash and appropriation authority to complete the transaction. And you may see CVAC budget check related warnings if Fiscal identifies there's not enough fund cash or appropriation authority, but your transaction activity is not going to be prevented. Versus control, control will check that for available fund cash or appropriation authority, and it will raise an exception if there isn't. And Fiscal will prevent your department and user from completing a transaction when a CVAC budget check exception occurs. So as mentioned before, your departments and you should already be familiar with SCO's existing validation that occurs today. Looking at point 3, if SCO determines there is not enough fund cash or appropriation authority to cover the payment or transaction, they void the transaction and then you receive the notification of the non-sufficient fund, the NSF. So the CVAC budget check functionality will raise exceptions in Fiscal. CVAC exceptions will occur if there's insufficient fund cash or appropriation authority present, or if no budgets, even for $0, exist in Fiscal for CVAC ledgers. This functionality, the CVAC functionality, will prevent users from transacting if there's not enough fund cash and appropriation authority. And looking at this picture here, if an exception occurs either in CV or CVAC, the transactions with exceptions will not interface to SCO Legacy until they are corrected. So we've been talking about exceptions. There are 2 types of CVAC exceptions that you should be aware of. The first one is true non-sufficient funds, NSF. These exceptions occur when a department does not have sufficient fund cash or appropriation authority, and this is a valid exception. Transactions that have these true NSF exceptions raised will not interface to SCO Legacy until they are corrected by the department. And now looking at the second type of exception, which is non-valid exceptions, these occur due to timing differences or when the balances do not match between SCO Legacy and Fiscal. And SCO and Fiscal are responsible for resolving these non-valid exceptions. So if you do encounter a non-valid exception, you can first identify what the exception is due to. It could either be due to a timing difference or a reconciling error. Reconciling error is when the budget balances do not match between SCO Legacy and Fiscal. It is SCO's responsibility to reconcile Fiscal and SCO Book of Record. So if the balances do not match and this is preventing your department from processing transactions, you can send an email to FSC. And what we're going to be covering today in this presentation is true NSF CVAC exception cases. If your transaction passes the CVAC budget check, there's no change and no additional action on your part needed. What we're covering in this presentation are the cases when CVAC budget check fails, either cash validation or cash validation appropriation control, and the changes that you should be aware of. Unposting a transaction is only allowed if there's a CVAC exception. So after the CVAC functionality is implemented for your department, Fiscal will no longer allow transactions that have passed the CVAC budget check and have posted to GL to be unposted. If an exception has occurred, your department can contact the FSC to unpost or reverse it, and transactions that have been unposted or reversed will be considered canceled. And then generally a new transaction will be required to correct a CVAC exception. So CVAC budget check verifies cash and appropriation during these following events. When the CVAC budget check runs, if an exception occurs in pay cycle, which is a group of vouchers, for CV, all the payments using the exception fund will go into exception. And for CVAC, all the payments using the exception appropriation will go into exception. For all other events, for individual transactions, for both CV and CVAC, the individual transaction will go into exception. And these individual transactions are CVAC budget checked on the individual level. And CVAC has cross-module impacts, so you can identify the staff that has been impacted by their fiscal roles, and we've listed them down here. And so that was an introduction of the CVAC functionality. Before we get into the events where it occurs, wanted to take a pause to go answer any questions that may have come up and answer the next Menti question. So pull it up here. The next question that we have is, have you reviewed any of the CVAC resources? And if so, which ones? And you can feel free to select more than one. Corey, do we have any questions?
So far, we don't have any questions.
Okay. Then we'll just give another minute for everyone to answer this question, and then we can go back to presentation content. So it looks like a lot of people have seen the infographic and the job aid. Hopefully, after this presentation, you'll have a chance to review the overview video, which we think will be pretty helpful. Okay, now we'll go back to the presentation content if there are no questions.
We did get one question in. So the question is, are SMIF deposits included in determining a department cash balance? I'm going to direct that question to Lon.
Hello. Yes, cash is made up with the account 1140 and 1210. So the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, we got another question. Is, can you please explain the difference between CV and CVAC?
Okay, we'll go back to the slide that talks about that. So we have on slide 5 the different definitions for cash validation and cash validation appropriation control. So CV is validating the cash for a fund at the time of payment, deposit, or during the cash reclassification process. And then CVAC is validating the authority at an appropriation level at the time of payment, deposit, or during cash reclassification process. So CV validates the cash, and then CVAC validates the authority.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? If not, I'll move on. Okay, now we'll get into the events. So the first one is pay cycle event. The CVAC budget check occurs for vouchers during the AP pay cycle. The process usually goes as the fiscal end user creates or cancels a payment or creates a manual payment. Fiscal processes the voucher and posts it. And then Fiscal runs the CVAC budget check during the pay cycle selection phase. And then during that time, Fiscal will identify any exceptions. If your voucher does fail the CVAC budget check, SCO will reset your workflow. And then you will receive a workflow reset notification that's sent as it is today. From there, your department can make changes to the voucher as needed and resubmit it for approvals when CVAC is available. If your department does not take any action, then the payment will not occur. Moving on to cash reclassification event. You may be wondering, what is cash reclassification? Fiscal uses cash reclassification to reclassify eligible departmental transactions into the statewide BU. During cash reclass, the CVAC budget check will occur during these following transactions. The CVAC budget check occurs for transactions created in Fiscal during the cash reclass process following these general steps. Fiscal end user creates a transaction. The transaction goes through the necessary approvals and posts to the subsystem ledger. Fiscal runs the CVAC budget check during cash reclass, and then the Fiscal end user takes actions for any exceptions that occur. A non-PFA related transaction CVAC exception will impact Fiscal in the following ways. So here we've put together a table of all the different modules and transactions, and the summary of what will happen if the CVAC budget check fails during each of these transactions. If your department does identify an exception on the CVAC exception dashboard during cash reclass in AR, AP, or GL, your department should request the FSC to reverse or unpost the transaction and then create a new transaction. If your department does not take any action, the CVAC budget check will reoccur for the transactions in the exception during the nightly batch process to check if there's available fund cash or appropriation authority. And then these CVAC exceptions must be resolved within a week. The FSC will reverse or unpost transactions with exceptions that are not cleared within a week. But Fiscal will notify departments before they take action on department's behalf. And then if your department identifies an exception in the CVAC exception dashboard for PC, what you should do is create a new PC transaction to correct the original transaction. Now we're moving on to PFA transactions. Before posting, Fiscal validates that PFA eligible transactions are in accordance with your approved PFA letter. These include labor distribution, allocations, and online GL journals. Cash reclass runs using PFA activity from the PFA submission ledger. So I'm sure you're all familiar with PFA interface functionality now. The Fiscal will run cash reclass on the new journals that have created in the PFA submission ledger. And then while cash reclass is run, it also runs the CVAC budget check. If CVAC budget check fails, cash reclass and cash basis entries are not created and do not interface to SCO Legacy STC36. If your department does identify an exception on the CVAC exception dashboard, what you should do is request FSC to unpost journals from the PFA submission ledger. And then the PFA review page will have the transactions available to reselect and recertify. And similarly, if your department does not take any action, the budget check, CVAC budget check will reoccur during the nightly batch process to check for new fund cash or appropriation authority. And then these exceptions must be resolved within a week. Okay, so now we've gone through 2 of the events. Those are the bigger ones. We'll take another pause to go back to Menti to see if there are any questions that have come up. So the next question is, what fictional place would you like to visit if you could? I think for me, I would choose Hogwarts.
Why Hogwarts?
Well, actually, I was thinking about that. I think it would be cool to see magic, but then I think it'd only be fun if I could visit and like do magic myself too.
It'd be pretty boring to be a muggle in Hogwarts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Willy Wonka's chocolate factory would be pretty cool too. While people are answering this
Wyoming.
question, I know. Corey, were there any questions that came in?
We did have a question about where the presentation is published, so I provided a link to everybody in the Q&A. We also had a question about if we will publish this recording on YouTube like we have in the past, and the answer to that is yes, we will.
Corey, do you have a fictional place you would like to visit?
I do. I actually put Narnia.
You want to go through the wardrobe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So you guys can keep answering this question. If we don't have any others that have come up in Teams, I can go back to the presentation. Okay, we'll head back to the presentation then. Yeah, feel free to continue to send in your answers though. We always like to see what you guys are interested in going to. Okay, now we will move into the third event, which is cash clearing. The CVAC budget check runs for CTS deposits and remittances during the cash clearing process. So after the Fiscal end user creates a CTS deposit or a remittance in Fiscal, Fiscal runs cash clearing, and then during that they run the CVAC budget check. Wanted to note that a CVAC exception should not occur in this event unless the budget is not yet established or set up. And then Fiscal will post the cash clearing entry after it has passed the CVAC budget check. If your CTS deposit or remittance fails CVAC budget check, contact the FSC to establish a budget within a week to make sure that your deposit occurs. SCO will then override the exception for the cash clearing transaction after the budget has been established. Moving on to the fourth event, the AR update. CVAC budget check runs for customer item payments, CIP, during the AR update process. Fiscal runs the AR update process to post the CIP in AR. And then during that time, they run the CVAC budget check during the AR update for transactions, since CIPs in the warrant bank account impact cash right away and do not go through cash reclass. If CVAC budget check fails, CIP payment entries do not post to GL or interface to SCO legacy. If your department identifies an exception on the exception dashboard during the AR update process, your department should request the FSC to unpost the transaction and then create a new transaction. Lastly, we're going to go over budget check event. The CVAC budget check runs for DJPs and online GL journals concurrently with the standard budget check. The process is the fiscal end user schedules the direct journal payment transactions or the non-intra-unit GL journal fiscal. Fiscal runs the standard budget check process and then runs the CVAC budget check. Fiscal identifies CVAC exceptions prior to transactions or journals posting, and the fiscal end user updates the DJP GL journal as necessary before running the budget check again. CVAC budget check runs for non-intra-unit GL journals GL 108 during the budget check. The fiscal end user will creates the non-intra-unit GL journals in fiscal for journals already posted in SCO Legacy. Fiscal then runs the standard budget check process and at the same time the CVAC budget check. And then if the CVAC budget check fails, the exception will be overridden by SCO since the transaction has already been posted in SCO Legacy. So that means there's no change to the process to correcting accounting in SCO Legacy. And now we finished going through all the events in which the CVAC budget check occurs. We'll take another quick break to see if there are any questions that have come up and then answer another Menti question. So the next question we have here in Menti is, what is your favorite season? I think for myself, I like spring just because I like the transition from winter to spring. But I like all the seasons, so it's hard to pick.
We do have one question. For federal funds, does the FTF drawdown must be submitted before creating a voucher payment? One. Lon, did you catch that question?
Let me answer this question. So our department would follow the normal business process. They can go ahead and create a voucher because SEO has up to 14 days to process pay the voucher, right? So they would have the time, to schedule do the federal drawdown. So they don't want to do it way ahead of time. They want to 3 days. They almost time to pay SEO, so they do the drawdown to make sure the fund is available.
All right, thank you, Carmen. Not a lot of fans of winter out there, it looks like.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I guess because of the cold. A lot of people like autumn, which is now. I agree that the fall leaves in SAC are very pretty. Do we have any other questions, Corey?
Not at this time.
Okay. So if we don't have any other questions, then we can go back to the presentation. So now we're going to go into the exception handling part of the presentation. So wanted to let everybody know that there is the new CVAC exception dashboard available. You can access this by going to Department 360 and under the error tile. You can use this dashboard to view consolidated lists of errors by exception and then identify the necessary documentation to correct them or next steps to follow. The users, which we mentioned earlier in the presentation on that slide, will have the proper roles to have the ability to drill down to these transaction details and make corrections. And then for more details on using the exception dashboard, you can refer to the job aid, which we've outlined in detail. And we've also created a CVAC exception dashboard video that goes through a walkthrough of the system. So we will actually show that to you guys right now. Recall that when transacting in Fiscal, CVAC budget.
Hey, Bri, I think you need to share your screen with the sound.
I thought I had, okay, let me redo that. Okay, Corey, let me know if you can't hear it.
I can't hear it yet, Bri. Let me take a pass at sharing it. Bri, let me take a pass at sharing my screen.
Recall that when transacting in Fiscal, CVAC budget check automatically creates exceptions if there is not enough fund cash or appropriation authority. An exception will prevent a transaction from moving forward until corrected. Fiscal has released the CVAC exception dashboard, which you can use to view exceptions and begin exception resolution. For more details about the overall CVAC functionality, watch our overview video on YouTube or refer to Job Aid Fiscal 461. Using the CVAC exception dashboard in Department 360, all Fiscal users can view consolidated lists of
All right, apologize for the technical issues. Bree, you're still muted.
trying to get the audio to play.
It's all right. Just play it through the speakers that you have.
Okay. Recall that when transacting in Fiscal, CVAC budget check automatically creates exceptions if there is not enough fund cash or appropriation authority. An exception will prevent a transaction from moving forward until corrected. Fiscal has released the CVAC exception dashboard, which you can use to view exceptions and begin exception resolution. For more details about the overall CVAC functionality, watch our overview video on YouTube or refer to Job Aid Fiscal 461. Using the CVAC exception dashboard in Department 360, all Fiscal users can view consolidated lists of exceptions. Users with the relevant roles can drill down to the transaction details in the Fiscal submodules to determine the required next steps to resolve exceptions. We will now go over how to navigate to and use the CVAC exception dashboard in Fiscal. To begin, navigate to the Department 360 Error Dashboard. Click on CVAC Exception. Now that you've reached the page, you can refer to the reference guide for exception type descriptions, and you can use the search criteria to identify CVAC exceptions. Enter in your search criteria and specify the exception type. After the search completes, if there are errors, they will show up here under the reference guide section. For example, we can see that this BU does not have any CVAC exception errors for customer item payments, but does have errors for direct journal payments. With the proper roles, you can click on the transaction ID link number to be redirected to that transaction and make the necessary corrections. Different actions should be taken depending on the event where the CVAC budget check has failed. Thank you everybody for bearing with us during that technical. We will have this video link available shortly after we finish up rendering it and publishing it. So the link will be available on the YouTube channel for you all to see. And then while we're here, just wanted to also point out that we mentioned there was a CVAC functionality video overview. That one is available. It's public. You can view it by going to the YouTube channel, and then it's called CVAC Control Functionality Overview Video. So we recommend watching that as well. Okay, so now that you've been able to see an overview of the exception dashboard, that is what you'll be able to use to handle your exceptions when when and if they occur on your transactions. Okay, and then with this new functionality, it is the responsibility of departments to manage CVAC exceptions within a week, as we mentioned before. We recommend that departments review the CVAC exception dashboard daily for new exceptions, identify the reason that any CVAC exception has occurred, and then update or create new transactions related to the associated event or process where the exception has occurred. And Fiscal and SEO also understand that this is a new process and want to support departments in your understanding of why CVAC exceptions are raised. So please contact the FSC if assistance is needed, and make sure to include CVAC control in the subject line description so that your ticket can be prioritized. And what we have here is a summary table for department CVAC actions for a true NSF. This basically lists out all of the events that we have just covered, including the processes. And it also lists out in this column here, in the right column, what actions you should take if CVAC budget check fails. This table is also in the job aid, so you can refer to it there as well. And with this functionality, we recommend that you follow these general tips to prevent your transactions from going into CVAC exception. The first one would be to check your remaining spending authority, your RSA, before submitting the transaction. It looks like we had a question related earlier to this. So if the drawdown is required for federal trust funds, ensure that the reclassification from Program 998 to True Programs is timely processed before submitting the payment. If a transaction is related to a bond fund, ensure the bond cash transfer is submitted prior to submitting the payment. And also ensure that the PFA interim transaction chart fields are correct and match your department's PFA letter before submitting to Fiscal. More tips include following the Department of Finance procedures to record refund to reverted AR payments. When creating a journal voucher to perform a departmental level chart field reclassification for reverted appropriations, make sure that the accounting date is in the same fiscal year as the original voucher accounting date. And then lastly, bill and collect reimbursements as soon as they are available. And then for a full list of recommended practices and general tips, they are listed out in the job aid, so you can refer to that. So you may be wondering what the benefits of the CVAC functionality are. What it will do is it reduces NSFs in SEO legacy and gives your departments better understanding of available fund cash and appropriation authority. Your department no longer will need to wait to be notified of NSFs by SEO, so you can take action on your own and begin exception resolution by referring to the exception dashboard. It'll reduce the number of void transactions in SEO legacy and limit unnecessary voiding and cleanup. And lastly, you have a better understanding of your current cash basis appropriation and fund level cash flow. In the presentation, we've also included this slide that lists out all the links to the additional resources that we have related to the functionality. And again, as I mentioned, the CVAC exception dashboard video will be coming soon, so look out for that on the Fiscal YouTube channel. And at this time, we've covered all of the content in the presentation, but we would really like your feedback regarding this presentation and the content we've produced. So wanted to go to Menti and just give you guys this opportunity to provide some feedback to us. And while you're doing that as well, we will go through any additional questions that you've submitted through Teams. Corey, do we have any other questions that have been coming in? Okay, doesn't seem like we have any questions right now. We'll stay on in case you guys have any others. Hopefully you've been giving feedback on this slide. We'll move on to the next one now.
Okay, so we do have a question right now. I feel like the question is that the FTF drawdown question, can we reiterate it? So the FTF drawdown question was, for federal funds, does the FTF drawdown have to be submitted before creating a voucher payment? So Bree, I don't know if you want to go to the slide where we answered that, or if Carmen or Lon, you want to respond.
So normally when payment is scheduled, and after 3 days, the drawdown must happen.
Okay, so just to reiterate, when you're scheduling your payment, make sure that it's within 3 days of when the drawdown occurs. Okay. Then we had another question, which was if we could give more context to the specific tips that we are asking or that we're providing here from what we've seen so far.
Just context around where these came from.
Mm-hmm. Like if there were any specific problems that some of the pilot departments faced.
Yeah, so this is these recommended practices and general tips. We received this feedback from the pilot departments. So we've had 3 groups of departments that have already been activated to the CVAC control functionality, and we asked them to share with us what their feedback was when they were going through the new functionality. And these are just general tips that they recommended doing to help with their experience with it. And then I believe that some of the other ones also came from our subject matter experts from what they've been seeing on their end with some transactions that have been going into exception. So I don't know if Lon or Carmen might want to provide any more context to that, but this is how we got these general tips.
Sorry, Miranda, can you repeat your question again?
Yeah, Carmen, they were just asking for context behind these general tips and why we're recommending them. So, for example, the second bullet here. You and Lon might have context on why you recommend this.
Yeah, because when the drawdown, are you talking about the second bullet?
Yeah.
So because when we do the federal drawdown, and then you will inbound as a TC30 inbound interface. So, but because the interface is close to the generic program 9998, the department still have to reclassify to the true program. So when we do the CVAC check, it tied to the specific program we check it. So make sure department will do that before, so it would not encounter any CVAC exception.
Thank you, Carmen. Okay, we'll move on to our last mentee feedback question, which is what did we do well today, and if there's anything that we could improve on for the next town hall. We really do value your feedback, especially as this is our first town hall that we've done with the Teams Live event. So if there's anything that you notice we could do better or any feedback that you have to give, we really value it.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention is we are rolling out the CVAC functionality in groups to make sure that we can give all of the new departments that are activated. Since the functionality is live in Fiscal, most departments are just set with tracked with. So as we're activating more and more departments, we wanted to make sure that we had enough people to manage any situations that might arise. We've had a very successful rollout and activation so far. It's been going very well, and you can refer to the job aid. The job aid actually has a table of when different departments are planned to go live. So we might be sending out some additional information there just to let future departments know when they will be rolling out. But you guys are everybody who's on this call should be part of that group 4 list to be activated next in Fiscal. And we look forward to working with each of you. You know, ideally this will be very smooth because you won't run into a situation where you would get an NSF. But if you do, hopefully this improves your business process by bringing those notifications up front.
So Corey, I do see another question is posting there. Is during the test phase, what types of problem did the BUs encounter? Please be specific. So Esther, are you online?
I do not believe Esther was able to. Oh, never mind.
Yes, I am here. Hi, Carmen. What was your question again?
Corey, the question disappeared. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, yes. The question is, during the test phase, what types of problems did the BUs encounter? So those are all our group 1, 2, and 3 departments. Please be specific.
So I think they're talking about during the testing. Are we talking about during the UAT testing or during the pilot department implementation? It sounds like during the pilot department implementation, right?
That's how I read it.
So I think if it's a UAT, then I can answer it. But for the pilot department, comment and land, anything that you guys encounter from your side?
So if you're talking about the pilot department, I can say stuff for that. So there's no major issue that we encounter. The only thing that we encounter is regarding the budget period. Because sometimes, our department, the appropriation will include multiple budget periods. It's just those budget period is not set up in the CVAC ledger, but they do set up in CCF Pro. So that's why we will get the exception list like no budget exists. So what we do is like we go ahead and set up the budget in the CVAC ledger. So that's the major thing that we encounter. Other than that, everything is good.
Okay. The next question that we had was, is there a fiscal query or report for CVAC exceptions? Yes, there is. We have added a new tab to the Department 360 exception dashboard. So there's an error dashboard that you can now go to, and then that dashboard will have all of your CVAC queries available for you to review. And then we have created a video which we'll share that outlines that process. It's also available in the job aid. So we do recommend that departments check that dashboard on a regular basis so you can identify any exceptions that have occurred.
Query, can I add a little bit more on that? So we are also updating our existing DFQ query, and then so most departments are using the query called DFQ KK13 budget exception query. So currently, you will see all the regular budget exception from the CC Prop and CC Ref, and then we are trying to add CVAC error as well, and then trying to join to the original document ID like a voucher. So stay tuned on that, and we are working on that one.
Okay, thank you. And we have no more questions.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, thank you everybody who's provided feedback. If you do have questions, you can always send in an email to fiscalcmo at fiscal.cmo.ca.gov. If we don't have any questions, then I think we could end this session early.
Brianna, I see another question.
So we just got one more question.
Just so to reiterate the question, that the budget is not accessible by department. So we at SEO team, the Scout team, will set up the budget. So that would take care of the exception. There's no action planning for the department.
That goes back to our team continuously monitoring overall CVAC status and making sure it's working for all departments as it's intended.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you everybody for attending today. Thank you for all of your questions. And we look forward to a smooth transition to the activation of CVAC functionality, control functionality. Thank you, everybody.